Hey, it's Amy Shaw here. What's up? Today I want to talk about shame, vulnerability, authenticity. It's another language than the one that I usually speak. But the reason this came up is because I have a friend from my local circle here. She and I are in a Facebook group together. And this week she posted something in that Facebook group kind of out to the community, asking a question about how to deal with a particular situation. This friend of mine is actually a therapist, and so I was answering her in the way that I would from a shamanic point of view. So, I was using words like power and empowerment and soul loss, and in that context, a shamanic context. And it seemed like the language that we were speaking was a little bit different. And, out came this word vulnerability. And to me, vulnerability is disempowerment. It is coming from a place of not being empowered. And so, there was some backlash with some of the other people in the group that were saying, oh, well, being vulnerable is having power. That is a source of power. And it really caused me to kind of step back and think through it and articulate my thoughts and my words and the knowledge and understanding and how it was coming through me so that I could express what I was trying to express in a much more precise way. So I went back because because the discussion was centering around vulnerability, and see what happened was my friend was vulnerable with somebody, and she ended up getting hurt by these people. They were judging her, and she felt shame about it. So this idea of vulnerability, I remembered back watching a Brene Brown video, probably her more famous TED Talk, where she talked about her research and vulnerability. And so I went back and watched it because I thought, maybe I do have it wrong. Maybe I don't understand really what vulnerability is. Because to me, when I hear vulnerability, I hear wounding. I hear opening oneself up to the potential to be hurt in some way, whether that's emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually. To me, that's what vulnerability is. And we do live in this culture now where you hear that word a lot. It's a buzzword, vulnerability. And we have sort of evolved from the sense of vulnerability being seen as weakness to now where it's touted as a strength. And for me, that's confusing, and so as I was sharing and these people were saying, well, geez, do you think that you've eradicated vulnerability from yourself? And like it was almost as if I was saying something outlandish. So, just trying to articulate exactly what it was I meant, and going back and reviewing that Brene Brown TED Talk about vulnerability. As I was watching Brene's TED Talk, it occurred to me, I really appreciated that she separated out shame in the process, but it occurred to me that the distinction that I think that she was falling short on, at least in this TED Talk, and it was several years ago, she's continuing to do this research, and to learn and to speak, and so, she may have evolved her message significantly since that initial TED Talk. It was quite a long time ago. I don't personally follow Brene Brown close enough to really know. I tried to read one of her books, and I could only get about a quarter of the way through it, and it didn't keep me interested. But that being said, I do very, very much appreciate her work and what she's doing, and I think it's great stuff. I don't have any problem with it. But as I was watching this TED Talk, it did occur to me that I don't think that Brene went quite far enough in making its distinction between vulnerability and authenticity. And so I think a lot of times people get the two things confused. So when you tell them, oh, I'm not vulnerable, I don't feel vulnerable, then they automatically assume that you're hiding, that you're being disingenuine. And it's interesting because I had this conversation with my husband. Men would tend to be less vulnerable, less inclined to promote vulnerability as a character asset. And I asked him, what do you think about vulnerability? I'm curious. Do you think that that's something that we should possess, that it's a positive thing? And he said, yeah, I do. I think that there's times when that actually can be a strength. So then I asked him, well, how? When would that be a strength? And he said, well, when you're trying to get somebody else to sort of lower their defenses, to open up to you, to be genuine, to have a genuine relationship, then you want to come across as being, vulnerable and open. And I wholeheartedly agree. But I was explaining to him, as a social worker, this is a skill I learned very early on in my career, because I would be going into people's homes and, literally the spaces where they live. I would have to do home inspections because I had foster children placed in these homes. So I had to look through their, medicine cabinets and just, I had to, really do thorough home inspections. And it was a huge invasion of their privacy. And, it was very uncomfortable for me. So there has to be a certain level of sort of trust and relationship building that occurs. And you can't do that from a very authoritarian sort of point of view. I had to work very hard at softening that job that I had to do by becoming more and more sort of authentic with myself. And so a lot of times, the foster parents would ask me questions, personal questions, they wanted to know. I was literally in their home every single week. So, by the end of the thing, so as time progressed and we're building this relationship, they knew a lot about me. They ask questions, they want to know if I have kids, they want to know if I have siblings, they want to know how I grew up, where I grew up, my situation. And I would always answer them very authentically, very much, open. But by the same time, because I was a professional and because I wasn't there in their home to have a therapy session or to unload any of my, sort of stresses that were going on at home at that moment, or, I wasn't there for that. There still had to be a, professional boundary. Certainly psychotherapists understand this intimately, the same situation for them. They have to go into the therapy session and be as authentic and trustworthy as possible to their clients so that they can start building, a trusting therapeutic relationship. But at the same time, that therapist is there for that client. They're not there to have a therapy session for themselves. So there has to be, very clear boundaries and this guardedness. The guardedness does not have to do anything with inauthenticity. It has more to do with power structure of the relationship. Now, saying it like that immediately sounds, sort of like a negative thing, but it really isn't, because it isn't any different to me theoretically in any relationship that I have. My relationship with my husband, of course, is different than any other relationship that I have. But by the same token, it's not, because I am authentic in every single relationship that I have. And in every relationship that I have, I don't feel like I'm vulnerable at this point in my life. There was a point in my life where I was vulnerable. I was very vulnerable. But that vulnerability came out of sort of this neediness and projecting my power outwardly, so that I'm looking to somebody else to define me, to tell me what my worth is, to tell me who I am. And when I open myself up like that, then I open myself up to the actual wound of vulnerability, which is shame. This is what Brene talked about in her TED Talk on vulnerability. She said that the difference between, the two groups of people, and I don't even remember what the two groups of people are off the top of my head. It's not something I really pay a lot of attention to, but it did strike me that when she talked about her research in the two different groups of people that she studied, the difference between them was shame. That one group experienced the shame and vulnerability and another group didn't. And I thought that was really a curious thing, because again, I don't think that she went far enough in really making the distinction between vulnerability and authenticity. Because I really think that somebody can be authentic and not be vulnerable. The case in point that came to mind immediately as I was discussing this with my husband is somebody that he and I both really, really respect, and that's Tony Robbins. I don't know if you know who Tony Robbins is or if you've heard of him. He has a show on Netflix, a documentary type thing, and it's called I Am Not Your Guru. Prior to watching that on Netflix, I had not really been that familiar with Tony Robbins. He was some sort of vague in the back of my mind. If you would have asked me who's Tony Robbins, I probably would have said, I'm not sure. Either he's like an athlete or maybe he's like one of those motivational speaker guys. I mean, that's really what I thought or knew of him, and that was it. After watching I Am Not Your Guru, and my husband and I have watched it 3 or 4 times together, I was so incredibly impressed with him, at least in that particular seminar that he holds. He does a lot of different seminars on business and all kinds of things. But that particular seminar that he holds, you know, at least as it was presented on Netflix, I was blown away. I actually really strongly believe that Tony Robbins is the pop American culture version of a shaman. And as he was talking to people through the whole thing, you know, when he was doing his little one-on-ones in front of everybody in the audience with particular attendees of his seminar, I just right away, I knew what was happening. And I was saying shamanically, I'm saying, oh, that's extraction. Oh, that's soul retrieval. Oh, that's extraction. That's soul retrieval. Soul retrieval. That, you know, he was just going through. And so the work that he's doing, although it's not, you know, a typical way we would see shamanic work being done, at its very core, at the soul level, it's completely shamanic. So I would call Tony Robbins a modern day pop American culture shaman. But the interesting thing about that is that I've read a lot of criticism of Tony Robbins. A lot of people who say that, you know, he's harsh, he's extreme, you know, he's insensitive. But it's interesting because if you watch that, you can see there's a subtlety about Tony and how he works. And with certain people, you know, even with women sometimes, they would get up and he would call bullshit. And then certain other women, he handled them with much more kid gloves. He was much more tender and sensitive and compassionate. And both sides, you know, both of those things come from the same place. They come from a place of being motivated to help people and to be fully present with them. I mean, fully present, and using all the skills, all the spidey senses, everything that, you know, you come to the table with to truly discern based on what these people are saying with their words, with their body language, you know, with their energy, all of that, to use all of that to really discern what the real problem is and to get to the heart of it. And I really feel that he does that. And so there are moments where he comes across as very harsh, and some people might take that as incompassionate. I personally don't. I really resonate with him personality style, and although I would never even compare myself to Tony Robbins because that man is just living a totally different life than I'm living or have lived or I'm going to live. The basic sort of personality structure, the skill set, and how it sort of manifests through him, it's really similar to my own. So it resonates with me. And a lot of people, you know, think that because I'm very blunt, I'm very forward, and you know, I'm not afraid to call bullshit, but it's not like in your face, it's not that kind of thing. It's more just standing firm in my truth and knowing what I see. The fundamental thing of that, though, is that I firmly believe in my practice, in my ethical standards, that sort of interaction must be invited. I don't go around and just tell people, you know, this is your problem. You know what your problem is? This is your problem. Here's how you fix it. You know, that really is disempowering. If people are coming to me and asking, as my friend did in this Facebook group, she put it out to the entire community. Hey, I have this problem and I'm asking for insight. I'm asking for help. So at that moment, she was really inviting. Ordinarily, because, you know, she's talking about this, you know, being vulnerable, and right away, because I know her also personally, here, you know, locally, we spent a lot of time with her, and I know her dynamic. Ordinarily, if a post like that, I would probably just pass it over. Even though the individual's asking for help, I probably would pass it over because I see what the problem is and you're not going to like it when I tell you. So it's easier for me to just not get tangled up. But in this particular case, because she is my friend and I do really care about her, you know, I opened up and I called it what it is. And, you know, I was telling her that really, you know, what it is you're giving your power away. When you're being vulnerable with people, that's not the same thing as being authentic. You know, you can be authentic and be real, as like Tony Robbins is. He shares his story. You know, he talks about where he comes from. You know, he gets people to open up. He goes right to the heart, and you know that he is fully in his heart appealing to people at their level of their heart. I mean, you can feel that genuineness about him. Yet at the same token, I don't think Tony Robbins is vulnerable. I don't think there's somebody in that audience of his that could tell him, you're this piece of you, you're just a fat and then he goes home and cries about it, and that he feels shame, or if he feels broken, or he feels invalidated. I don't think he has those experiences. So is it really truly possible for people to get to a place of not being vulnerable? I think it is. And is that then saying that something's wrong with them, or that they're automatically, they must be narcissists or you know, psychopaths because they don't have the ability to feel vulnerability? I don't think that that's the case. Again, going back to my friend, you know, she's externalizing her sense of worth and her value with these people that she's interacting with. And she's like, I'm opening up and I'm sharing my heart, you know, and in what she's getting in return is shame, you know, the shame about herself. She's being invalidated. And so she slinks back into herself, and she goes home and she feels incredibly sad, you know, and abused. She's putting the whole interaction in this context of, you know, victim and abuser. And so, you know, right away to me, I saw, well, this is what you're doing. You're disempowering yourself because you're looking outside of yourself to get that validation, when really it has to come from this point of strength inside of you. So for me, this is what I see vulnerability as being. It's when people take that inner core and they're putting it out here. That's actually vulnerability. And I don't think that that's power. I don't think it's power. I think it's opposite. I think it's disempowering. And I don't think that it's healthy. I don't think that, you know, for myself, in my practice, that I would encourage anybody to be vulnerable. Now, being authentic, that's a totally different thing. You know, being authentic is actually being in your power. You know, it's being real with who you are, but also coming from a place of confidence, wholeness, self-actualization, you know, having that inner strength that it doesn't matter what you say, or what you say about me, because I know who I am, and I'm okay with that. This really gets into, you know, magic as well, and how it works, where power comes from and how it works. My last video I made, I think my last one, I was talking about ceremony, and, you know, I've talked about it several times before in videos. It's the same concept, really, you know, even shamanically speaking, or, you know, when you get into, you know, the magics. It's not the external, it's not the incantations or the words, it's not the objects that you're using, you know, in the rituals or the ceremonies, you know, it's not the actual, you know, whatever, hand movements or dance moves, or, you know, clapping or drumming, or whatever it is, you know, these rhythms, whatever it is that you're trying to create externally. The magic is not actually really in that. That's all an expression that sort of brings out from internally the power. So the power is always here. It can't be anywhere else. And so it does go full circle back into that concept. I really am going to make another video just about that power in the near future. But for now, I just wanted to talk about it in terms of relationships, you know, power in relationships, and how that sort of equates in a way that we all experience, whether you're a shaman or, you know, you're practicing magic or whatever you're doing, you're in relationships. And relationships have to do with these concepts of, you know, power, vulnerability, authenticity, and all these things. This relates to all of us. So again, I just wanted to make this video to make the distinction between authenticity and vulnerability, and the language of it is a little bit different than the shamanic language that you know, I typically use, which is more around, you know, power and soul loss and concepts like that. But basically it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And I just wanted to flesh it out and share that with you, and I hope that that's helpful. If anything, it gives a little bit of insight into who I am, what my ethics are, what my practice is like, the kind of paradigm of understanding that I come from. So as always, you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have questions or comments, you can leave them below the video, or you can get a hold of me on my public Facebook page, through email, and a bunch of other different ways. So I love you guys so much, and have a very blessed, authentic day.